Hello and welcome to the Pagan Portal Podcast, produced by Moonbooks Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. If you prefer the audio-only version, hop on over to Spotify. If you would like early access to the YouTube version of these podcasts, then please consider becoming a member and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Today, we welcome the very wonderful Rebecca Beattie. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here.
I'm looking forward to today. I'm sure we'll have to be edited to stop us waffling on.
Could well be.
Yeah.
And we start talking.
Oh yeah. So can we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. I am. So my name is Rebecca. My main things, I think, the main strings to my bow. I've got many things that I do in life, but my main thing is writing. My main passion is writing, alongside witchcraft, because the two things in my head can't be disconnected. So I do write other things. I do write about other things other than witchcraft, but I'm happiest when I'm combining the two. And I also teach. So I teach witchcraft classes as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. For me, writing and witchcraft, hand in hand. Yeah, absolutely. Well, witchcraft and anything, really. Witchcraft. Yeah, housework, cooking, whatever it is, it all blends. So you've mentioned witchcraft, but how would you describe your spiritual pathway?
That's a really interesting one. I was thinking about this earlier because I was down
difficult one.
I was down in the kitchen, as you do, turning my fingers purple with vegetables, and thinking about how self-definition is quite a complicated one, isn't it? Because there are so many different strands of witchcraft. I'm really keen to embrace all of them in the sense that there is no right or wrong way into the craft. It's whichever way we go, doesn't matter whether you're from the initiatory tradition or from the hedge witch tradition, whichever way you've gone in, we're playing with the same currents, aren't we? So my main self-definition, there's two ways I would self-define. One is, first and foremost, as a practicing pagan, because it's the nature that brings me in. It's the connection to the sacred in nature. So that's my first label that I put on myself. The second is that I am from an initiatory path. So I'm Gardnerian by training and by practice. So I do come from a coven-based system. However, it was somewhat reluctantly, because as a young hedge witch, I had no interest in joining a coven. I did not want to be part of a group, but it was the training that lured me in. It was learning something different. But the other thing is that the bit that I think sometimes, unless you've been in a initiatory path, one of the things people don't necessarily think about is the fact that covens tend to meet once every month, once every 6 weeks. There's an awful lot of days in between coven meetings. So my main label that I would put on myself, if anything, is hedge witch, kitchen witch. It's the crafting side that keeps my practice alive and going. And that's something I do daily, not once every 6 weeks for the wheel of the year. So yeah. So there's lots of different labels, aren't there?
It's like talking to myself. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, really, but it's all very similar. I liked the structure. It was my training. My training was Wicca, even though I'm a hedge witch, kitchen witch. It's that structure of learning, isn't it? That's the bit that I liked. Yeah, do this, and learn this. Yeah,
and the learning that you don't get in books, because although a lot of stuff is published, a lot of oathbound material is out there. Mostly, it's the practice, isn't it, that you don't get written down in books. It's the experiential kind of the feeling of being in a witch's circle, which is very hard to capture in language. And those are the bits that the sort of noetic qualities of it that I think I love the most.
So how did that all start then? What pushed you in that direction?
Ooh, what pushed me in was having a really miserable time. It I would say what pushed me in was my Saturn return, my first Saturn return, which was, I got to the age of about 26, 27, 28. From childhood, had this absolute obsession that I was going to be an actor. That was my thing. So I'd done everything. I'd gone to university and was actually working as a professional actor, but having an awful time with it. Getting awful jobs, being treated really badly, and getting very jaded. And at the age of about 28, I had started on the path to witchcraft. I'd discovered hedge witchery, and I'd been reading everything I could get my hands on, and got to the point where I knew I needed to stop acting, because it was going to mean, it was that kind of, there must be more to life than this moment. And decided that I was going to take a year off from acting. I was going to go and find myself, and then go back to acting when I'd found myself, and when I'd rediscovered my sense of love of life and all of those lovely things that we find along the way. So I took the year off and stumbled upon a certain bookshop in London which was offering at the time classes. I came across a internet forum that said hedge witches, solitary witches, here's a course for you, and walked into that kind of training session, which lasted about 6 weeks. I think it was a 6-weekly class, and then once I got to the end of that process, I was just like, I can't stop now. I just cannot. This is it. I found where I need to be, and at that point, I just kept saying to the teacher, "What next? What next? What next?" And thankfully, she had lots of what nexts answers, and that's where I went. And ironically, that's sort of like 26-ish years ago now, and which is quite frightening. And I've never gone back to acting. Never went back. It hasn't called me in any way. I occasionally have conversations with friends who are actors, and they'll say, "Oh, do you fancy?" And I'm like, "No, no." Really
Been
really,
there, done that.
Yeah, love what I'm doing now, which is more me.
Yeah, it's a calling, isn't it? It definitely is a calling.
Yeah, very much. And I think that's another thing that, when I often get emails from people saying, I'm just finding my way and I want to know where to go. And it is very much that kind of, it is a calling. And particularly, I mean, the initiatory path is definitely a calling. It's not, it's a very Marmite kind of thing. You either love it or you hate it. And
it's a big commitment.
It's a big commitment.
Yeah.
It is a big commitment. There was a moment where I sat on a rock in Devon, having a conversation with the universe, and there was a moment where I kind of said, "Okay, I'm handing it all over to you. Wherever you, tell me where you want me to go. What do you want me to do?" It's an in-service role, isn't it? I think.
And the universe usually knows what we need, which isn't necessarily what we want. Yeah, I tend to put my trust in it. It generally, sometimes it's a git, and I think, what are you doing that for?
Yes, but there's a humour in it as well, which I really appreciate. I often refer to the gods as the cosmic joker, because it's that kind of, that moment where, if you've done a spell for something and you get the results exactly as you asked for them, but there's always a little twist in the tale, or there's a little
it's never that straightforward, is it?
Exactly. So there is that moment where I think it's an ongoing relationship with the divine, always, which again is not for the faint-hearted, is it? It's one of those things where, unless you're willing to surrender quite a lot of things, I think, a lot of people come into witchcraft because they imagine that they'll have control of their lives. I often get questions from people saying, "Oh, I want to do a spell for this, that, or the other," and and I need help with this. And it's usually because people are feeling powerless and they're feeling, oppressed in some way by some situation. And they imagine that having a handle on witchcraft will give you control of your life. And your response is is exactly the response I give, which is like a cry laugh.
I think a lot of people as well, modern times, they want a quick fix and they think, oh, a spell, that'll fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the spell crafting is really, I find that really interesting as well, because I sometimes forget that we do that. I can go months without doing any spell crafting at all.
Yes.
And it's not about the spells and what you're getting out, it's what you're putting in, I think, that's more important.
Absolutely. I think there is this idea, isn't there, that witches, we get up every morning and collect the dew from the grass, summon a few demons, and make the breakfast. Then we spend the day casting spells and making potions all over the place. Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no. I'd love it if that was reality.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But it's no, sadly.
Now, you mentioned teaching, and I know you do teach a lot of workshops. What is it that you like about that teaching side of things?
I think, again, there's a sense of service to it for me, that I again was a reluctant teacher. The same teacher that taught me, that sort of said to me one day, I went to this my teacher, and I sort of said, I'd quite like to teach a workshop on self-care for worn out pagans, because I think it would be a really good thing. And I was doing this in my day job for drug and alcohol workers, because that's what I do in my day job. And she kind of looked at me and she said, yes, well, I think you'd be better off doing this. And she sort of presented me with this proposal that I take on a group of young folk that were seekers, who at that point, this is all pre-COVID, she wanted me to take on a monthly kind of, almost like not as a circle, because in my tradition we don't necessarily do circle time before coven training, but she wanted me to teach these young folk about witchcraft and kind of let them explore, help them explore. So I took on this teaching thing that we referred to as the witchlets. They self-defined as the young urban witches. And I kind of went in thinking, at this point I must have been in my probably late 30s, early 40s, and I was thinking, what on earth are they going to want from me? Because I'm not young. Certainly, I was living in London, but I never really defined as an urban person. But I found that as I was teaching them, I was teaching myself. There's the old adage that you teach what you need to learn. And I guess for me, it was that kind of reconfirming every month. I was reconfirming my path, because I was rediscovering the things that I'd loved when I came in. And the teachings just kind of carried on from there. It's sort of, it's changed and morphed and grown. So come COVID lockdowns, everything went online. And that was one of my funniest spell moments. When I was teaching online through COVID, it was one of those moments where I suddenly realised, we talked earlier about the humour that comes with spell crafting. And before COVID, I'd been doing a lot of academic conferences and travelling overseas with my academic work. And had loved it so much. I did a spell to say I'd like to teach overseas. I want to teach internationally. That was the spell, the moment that I did this big working and said, right, I want to teach internationally. And then during COVID lockdown, I was sitting in my kitchen in Zone 5 in London, which was a very tiny flat, teaching online through Zoom, and was doing a class where I often said to the students, tell me what's happening in nature where you are, because we were looking at the Wheel of the Year and how nature was, behaving. And all of a sudden, one of the students said, "Oh, it's forest fire season where I am." And I sort of thought, "Huh? Where are you?" And she said, "Oh, I'm in San Francisco, and it's forest fire season." And then I suddenly had that moment where you think, "Oh my God, the spell I want to teach internationally, I didn't tell it."
You weren't specific.
I didn't specify that I wanted to travel, and it's just like, oh, great, thank you.
Yeah. And that's the reality of spell work, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. The reality is you don't get to control things, and you don't, you basically have to go with the flow and, riff with it a little.
I think you're right though with the teaching. I learn so much from my students. I learn, you're right. You are directed into the areas that you need to know about. But I do little things that those new to the craft teach me a million years on into it. And you think, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that?
Right.
It's all part of the journey.
Absolutely. It's all about the journey. And it is that, sometimes with a new pair of eyes, you can see things in a way that those of us that have been doing it for a while haven't remembered. Oh yeah, there's that aspect as well.
You do get a bit blinkered, don't you? And I do think it's nice to go back to the basics occasionally too, just as a refresher. Because you do forget stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I do.
I do. Yeah, I forget a lot.
So out of all that teaching, or even out of your practice, do you have any particular favourite areas of the craft to work with?
I think, ironically, my real passion is, there's two really, Wheel of the Year and Planetary Magick are the two areas that I love the most. I find that the planetary magic underpins everything I do. So if I'm making, if I'm making incense, or if I'm making an oil or a necklace or whatever it is that the spell crafting is happening around, the planetary magic underpins that. So that's my kind of go-to list of correspondences, if you like. But I also think the herb crafting is the bit as well that really, really lights my fire. I think as a child, long before I knew about the existence of real witches, my childhood, I grew up on Dartmoor, which is very, very remote, beautiful, remote, very nature, nature's all around you. And I would play in the garden at home, picking little wildflowers from the hedgerows and mixing them with spring water, and then I'd present it to my mum and say, "It's perfume. I've made you perfume." And it was, and then at 18, I sort of, for 16 to 18, I discovered aromatherapy and loved essential oils, working with essential oils, and then started to explore working with herbs. And really, the witchcraft helped me to place all of those things together. So it gave me a reason to be working with the herbs. I think that, although aromatherapy, medical aromatherapy never really appealed to me, but and medical herbalism never really appealed to me. But it's the spell crafting with the herbs and the oils and that's the bit I really love, the kind of creativity that goes with the craft. We refer to it as the craft, and it's the crafting bits that I love the most.
No, I know what you mean about herbs. I did take a medical herbalist course, but I was terrified of poisoning someone after it. No, let's stick with the magic, because I technically can't kill anyone.
Exactly. No,
technically.
Absolutely. Technically.
Now, the Wheel of the Year interests me. I like working with the seasons. I like working with what's happening with the energy of each day. And I do work with the Wheel of the Year as a structure. Do you think it needs to be flexible given changing of seasons? And how do you approach that?
Resounding yes, absolutely. I think that, if we think about the evolution of the Wheel of the Year as it's gone so far, we've got, a bunch of ancient Celtic festivals that were celebrated in the British Isles, kind of brought together with some other festivals. I always think about the story I was told, and everyone has a different sort of beginning story, but the story I was told was that, Gerald Gardner and Ross Nichols, we've got Wicca and we've got pagan druidry coming together and bringing their halves of the Wheel of the Year. So, we have the druids celebrating the equinoxes and the solstices, and the witches doing the other festivals. Can never remember if they're cross quarter days or quarter days, but the other ones.
Those other ones.
Beltane.
It all fits together.
And then they bring it together and it fits together and it works beautifully. So we've got this kind of funny mixture, haven't we, of ancient and modern. One of the questions my partner and I often scratch our heads over is, what's wrong with new? Why do we anchor after the ancient? And I think there are ancient aspects to what we do with the Wheel of the Year. However, I don't think for a minute that what Gerald Gardner was doing when he kind of came up with ideas around Wicca was creating something that had to be practiced in the same way every year for all eternity. He was creating a system that was inspired by ancient ideas and was infinitely flexible to the modern world. So it seems crazy to me that if I have a student who is in say, just out of the top of my head, if I have a student who's in Australia, why would they be celebrating the coming of the whitethorn at Beltane? Or, it just doesn't work, does it? It doesn't work at all. And I think that if we are, the beauty of modern paganisms as a kind of a play park, if you like, is that we can adapt and change and grow and work in ways that work for us. And I think that the Wheel of the Year, having it cast in stone, it will kill it dead within, 50 paces. And really what we need to be doing is always adapting to where we are in the world and what's happening around us. So the question I always ask my students is, what's happening in nature where you are at every turn of the wheel? Because I was doing a class on Imbolc a couple of weeks ago, and one of my students in the class said, I'm in Miami. Then, Wim got snowdrops, and so I said to her, okay, tell me what's happening where you are. And she said, oh well, we've had the winter with the air conditioning off, so I've been able to have the windows open and the sea breezes. And now the mango trees are starting to flower. And I said, that's what you need to be looking at then. Those are the aspects. Great, we've got this moment before the hot season hits you that, it's a very similar thing in a way, that we're in the British Isles, we're celebrating the promise of spring. You are in any other place as well. It's just what you're seeing will be different.
Yeah.
So
I think some people do struggle. I'm talking to people in America that are still under 6 foot of snow. So even if there were snowdrops, you wouldn't be able to see them. So it has to adapt, doesn't it? And our seasons change as well. And my garden's completely confused.
Yeah.
Mother Nature's definitely drunk. I think it's yeah. But I like that it's the pushing people to use the wheel as a prompt to connect with what's outside.
Absolutely.
I think that's the important part.
Absolutely. It's the questions we ask ourselves. And I think those are the bits that, if it makes you just, the way I always describe the Wheel of the Year to people that haven't done it before is it's just an opportunity every 6 weeks to pause from the craziness and have a look outside, what's going outside, what's going on out in your garden or the park or the, wherever you are, what's going on outside in nature.
I think that's important for witchcraft too, isn't it? For me, it's all about connection. It's energy. We work with energy, and it's all about being connected to that energy.
Yeah, definitely.
I think witchcraft as a whole has to be fluid, I think, doesn't it? Particularly in today's modern world where we have all of this technology as well. I bring that into my magic too. Well,
Yeah.
we're talking today in different parts of the country because of technology.
Absolutely. It might be a bit clunky sometimes, but it's, nevertheless, good old Mercury and his silly, his ways of messing with things. But, there are ways that you can weave in the ancient and the modern. So I kind of think that's the world that I'm happiest living in, is one where we're embracing what's going on in the world, but we're also remembering that there's another kind of layer of meaning that goes on underneath.
I think you're right about the new, though. There does seem to be a little bit of resistance in that's new way of working with stuff, which it's not real, doesn't make it proper because it's new. I think it has to be fluid, and there's nothing that says you can't work with that because it's new. In 50 years' time, it won't be new.
Absolutely.
We'll be vintage.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that moment, isn't it, where you think if you wanted to have an orthodoxy, then go and enjoy the monotheistic religions. You don't need to bring that kind of sense of the orthodox to this. We're here because we're rejecting that, not because we're kind of wanting to recreate it. And I think, there's a lot of aspects to modern pagan practice where I think people are still bound by what they grew up in, or bound by what they were taught in the organized religions. And I don't think this is the place for that. I think just start with a clean slate and see where it takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're all different anyway. So yeah, it's got to work for us. Now, you did mention planetary magic, and I must admit that's not one of my areas that I'm particularly good with. I do look things up, but how would you incorporate the planets? You said you work them in with your daily witchcraft. How can you give us examples of how you'd work with the planetary magic?
It's something that I was trained in. So the coven that I was initiated into was a very traditional kind of. It had traditional ways of working, and taught us to go and look at the classical methods and learn them, and read the grimoires and understand how they work. So a good part of my pre-initiatory training was reading the grimoires. And if you're reading grimoires, then you need to understand the pre-modern planetary magic that underpins them. If you ask me about modern planetary magic, so if you start talking about Uranus and Pluto and all of that, I just look blank. It was very classical, as in the pre-modern 7 planets, even though we know some of them aren't planets, but this was the way it goes. And it became, I think, because I was so absorbed in it in my pre-initiation training, and it just kind of stuck with me. It's really weird. And I had students that I taught afterwards who would be like, but it's not true. How can you work with a magical system that's not true? We know that the sun isn't a planet. We know that the moon isn't a planet. How does that work? But what I love is this link that it gives us. If we want the ancient, what planetary magic gives us is this unbroken link all the way back to ancient Babylon, 4000 BCE, when our magical ancestors start looking up at the heavens with the naked eye and seeing what's going on, and seeing this, strange phenomenon that you have the 2 luminaries. So you've got the sun and the moon that give light, and then you have what they refer to as the 5 wandering stars that would move across the heavens and not stay in a constellation. They would be in different places at different times. So I love this link it gives us, that follows through ancient Babylon to ancient Egypt to ancient Greece and Rome, and all the way through to to the modern era, really. And I use it in so many ways because it categorizes herbs and stones and oils to different planetary associations. It gives you numbers to work with if you want to, if you're a numerologist, you've got numbers to work with. So every spell crafting I ever do inevitably always has the pre-modern planetary system at its heart, whatever I'm doing. So I might be thinking, okay, I want to do a spell for, say you want to do a spell for bringing a book to successful fruition, then, you've got the planets that would work in that way. So you could bring Mercury in to give you the communication. You could have the sun to sort of bring it to a successful outcome. And right down to one of the best things I ever learned from one of my students, when she was doing the curriculum, the pre-initiation curriculum, was that she said to me, I found a really good way to work with the planets. I have planetary underwear. So depending on what day of the week it is, I will be wearing the appropriate planetary underwear. And I have to confess, that was the best thing I ever learned from a student. I had to kind of do it with humour.
I can see how that would work.
So it's Wednesday, okay, she's wearing orange underwear. It's Thursday, she's wearing purple, So I just thought that was such a good way of
brilliant,
bringing a new spin on it.
That is, I do bring the planet. That's how I work with the planets, is in my spell working. I do bring in like that, and I'm not going to forget the underwear now. Each time I work a spell, I'm going to have to check the underwear. Yeah,
exactly. Brilliant. Sales of orange pants are now going to probably take off.
It all works. I love colour magic too, so that works for me.
Yeah,
brilliant. It's layers, though, isn't it? It is bringing in those layers to the magic,
absolutely.
So it works.
Yeah. And I think that
it's the most energy.
Absolutely, and I think the most effective spell crafting that I've encountered is always when you're layering.
Yeah.
So the meaning is coming in at all the different levels. It's not just light a candle and it's done. It's a kind of, okay, let's work out all the ways that we can embody this practice. And I guess it does.
So actually thinking about the layers, I know you work with elements as well. They're a core, really, aren't they, to witchcraft? What do they mean to you?
I find it really interesting that one of the debates in some of the witchcraft circles is, do we work with elements or don't we? Because there are some covens now that are kind of saying, oh no, we don't work with elements. That's not our practice. That, the Alexandrians brought that in or whatever. I find it really interesting because I think that if we're a nature-based religion and we're practicing, so if I'm casting a circle, if I'm working skyclad, I'm certainly not working outdoors because it's too cold.
Not in England.
Exactly. No. Exactly. And then you don't want to scare the neighbours that much. So if I'm doing a skyclad witch's circle, I'm going to be doing it inside. It's going to be indoors in the privacy of my home. How else are you going to bring nature into your circle than through the elements? So it's a really easy way of just remembering that we are a nature-based faith, and that's what we're doing, is celebrating nature. And if I've got earth, air, fire and water in my circle, then I'm bringing those in.
But elements are in everything, aren't they? Everything can be associated with it. I mean, like you were saying with the herbs, they've all got planetary connections, correspondences. They all have the element correspondences as well, don't they? For me, that is an integral part of my magic, of witchcraft. Yeah, they are a big foundation thing for me. Absolutely. I can't even think about it with them not being there. That's weird.
No. Yeah.
Each to their own, obviously.
Each their own. Everybody has their own kind of way of working. And
that's
I
weird.
guess that's and that's what makes this a diverse path, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we've got all these different ideas coming in and being worked with.
Now, you mentioned Dartmoor. I visited Dartmoor last year. We stayed in Dartmoor for a few days. It was very magical. Do you think you are influenced by the landscape wherever you are?
Yes, absolutely. I think I was lucky enough, when we talk about the COVID pandemic, I was lucky enough, it changed my world completely. So up until COVID, because of the actor thing, because I was adamant I was going to be an actor, I'd gone to London. I'd left Dartmoor at 18 and was absolutely convinced that the adventures were out in the world. It was where I needed to be, and landed in London eventually for the acting work, and then spent 30 years living in London. And I'm grateful I was there, because I did love London. I loved every minute of it. It's where I learnt my craft. It's where I learnt to teach. It's where I did my academic work. It's where I landed into my day job, which is also part of my vocation, is how you give back to your community. But every one of those 30 years, every single day for those 30 years I lived in London, I was homesick all the time. So it was this thing where I used to think, well, I'll never get back to Dartmoor. It's where I grew up. It's where I'll be buried, or scattered. But I'm not going to find a way back to Dartmoor very easily, because there's not, it's not the kind of place where there's loads of jobs and all the rest of it. It's quite lots of sheep, lots of sheep. And I used to have jokes with people I knew in London, where we'd sort of talk about what our alternative life would have been if we hadn't left home. And yeah, I could have married a farmer and been a sheep farmer, and all of that kind of thing. But I know that wouldn't have satisfied me at that age. I would have needed something that had a bit more, bit more to it. But I had this issue where I missed home. So while I was in London, I knew that nature was missing. I knew that that's what I needed to connect to. And that kind of came with the pagan path, was discovering places to plug into nature in London. So I was very much connected to the landscape there, whether it was in a city park or in the, I ended up living on the outer edges of London. So I used to walk in the woods there and the fields and just still in London. And then COVID happened, and my organisation, because I work back end in the support area, my organisation basically said to all support staff, go home. We don't want to see you for the period of the lockdowns. You need to go and work from home. And all of a sudden I was sitting in zone 5 in London thinking, hang on a minute, it would take me 3 hours to walk from where I live on the outskirts of London to the centre. This isn't London. I don't live in London anymore. This is something else. And I kind of thought, well, if I can be this far out, what's to stop me being even further out? Yeah. So I had, I had a lovely boss at the time who I still work with, who sort of talked about the fact that COVID was going to bring some existential questions for people. And I kind of went in about a week into lockdown and sort of said to her, I've got the first existential question. I want to go home. I want to just go home. I can't be in the city anymore. And that's what enabled me to leave. So I'm really lucky. I'm back in I'm back on the edges of Dartmoor. I can see it from my window. And what's really interesting was that I left, this is the ultimate ha-ha moment from the universe. I left Dartmoor because I was convinced that life was somewhere else. I left Dartmoor because I was convinced I'd find myself somewhere else and that I'd find creative fulfillment somewhere else. But it was only when I came back here that the writing started to take off, and I was plugged back into my electrical circuit, straight into the hills. And you have that moment, don't you? I always think that lovely line in The Charge of the Goddess where she says, if that which you seek you find not within yourself, you'll never find it without. And it's like, oh, right, that's what that means.
Realization.
Absolutely. So it's that, you go on this great big seeker's journey that lasts 30 years and end up coming back to where you started. And it's like, oh, that's where I am. I've just found myself now, finally. Yeah. Finally, after all that time. So I do think, yes, to being plugged into the land, but you have to be plugged into the land wherever you are. I used to come home for regular plug-in points. yes, I am happiest when I'm here.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think there are places, aren't there, that make you feel at home.
Yeah.
Truly at home.
And it's really interesting that after 30 years, I did think of London as home. I did, it was my home. But if you said, where are you going? When you go to Dartmoor, where are you going? I'm definitely going home. That is soul home.
Yeah.
I used to say London was heart home at one point, but Dartmoor was soul home always. And that's never changed.
But they are quite polar opposites, aren't they?
Yes.
So you couldn't get more polar opposite, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, part of the journey. And I think COVID changed things for an awful lot of people in that, like you say, that realization moment. And it changed a lot of things. And a lot of things went online. And I think it opened up the online world, didn't it?
Yeah,
which
definitely.
To reach more people and for people that can't get out and that kind of thing, it has been brilliant. What about literature then? I'm going to jump to literature. How has that influenced you and your pathway?
I think immensely. I mean, the upbringing I had, the one thing about growing up on a national park with nobody around you is that you have to find things to do. So my childhood was largely spent, running around the malls with my dog, which I do now, or with my nose in a book, which I do now, or watching drama adaptations of books, which I still do now. And I think for me that the essential link, one of the things, I made reference to my academic career, but I haven't really talked about what that is. But I did a PhD on a Shropshire nature writer called Mary Webb, who everybody's forgotten about. She's kind of vanished into the ether, and I have so many moments with her. It's quite spooky. But through the PhD, I was struggling because I was trying to place her within the literary sphere, trying to sort of academics. What's really interesting about academia is they like you to find new discoveries, but they don't want them to be that new. So you have to be able to place. Yes, it's like, okay, we've discovered this writer, Mary Webb, but what is she like? Which box are we going to put her in? And I really struggled with it because she lived through modernism, but she was a nature writer. She wasn't writing about the city, unlike all the other apparent modernists. And so one of the things I did was started to go in search of other writers like her, and I needed to try and place her within the academic canon. And what that did was led me into realizing that there was this whole world of literary witches that existed long before Gerald came up with the idea of Wicca, long before the repeal of the Witchcraft Act. So, if you think about where things were in the British Isles, living under the Witchcraft Act, which had been in place from the 1700s right up until the 1950s, you can't write about witchcraft because you'll get imprisoned. What do? You write novels. It's just make believe. It's not real.
Hide it in plain sight.
Yeah, hide it in plain sight. So we have all these amazing writers, that appeared in the 1920s. We've got that burst of obsession with the occult that happens in the Victorian era, and then that kind of peters into this sort of burst of literary witches that appear in the 1920s, around the time Margaret Murray's writing about the witch cult in Western Europe. And I know she's highly criticised for not being a good scientist, but if you put a different bent on it, I don't think modern paganism could exist had she not come up with this amazing idea. But because we've called it non-fiction, she's got a lot of criticism because it's, they sort of say, oh, well, it's not factual, so it's not real. But literature has the capacity to influence us in ways our storytelling traditions, that's how we learn. That's how our unconscious minds pick up ideas. And so I kind of found this rush of writers that I encountered when I was doing this research, and that's what led me to write Nature Mystics for Moonbooks. It was written as a blog for Moonbooks, who were really good at sort of saying, go for it, see what you discover and write as a blog. And then at the end of the 12-month period of writing the blog, we decided to put it out as a book. But it was discovering all of those little connections through literature that give us the idea of modern paganism being a thing, so that when the Witchcraft Acts were repealed and when Gerald Gardner was coming up with all the ideas he had, those ideas will have come from what he was reading. They would have come from what he was seeing around the world, the different cultures that he was experiencing, but they also came from the stories he was reading and writing. I always say, and I hate to say this, I'll probably go to hell for saying it, but Gerald wrote some of the most terrible novels about that I've ever encountered. They're really not good as pieces of literature.
We'll be in hell together. It's all right. I'll keep you company.
But you try and read High Magick's Aid, and it's unreadable as a novel, but it's the blueprint for witchcraft today. Yeah. It's just set in a literary setting. So I do think that the thing I love about literature is the capacity. Is which came first? Was it the literary witch or the real witch?
Right.
And we'll never really know, will we? No. Because the two things are so entwined.
Yeah. Yeah. I think literature, I like you, I spent a lot of my childhood reading, losing myself in a book, and I still do now. And there are those key ones on there that stay with you, that influence you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Literature is so important. I think it's scary these days, so many children that don't read books. I don't even want to think about it. So as I kind of finish up, what new adventures or projects have you got planned ahead?
I'm exploring the areas of Celtic traditions. I'm working on a book at the moment, which is all about winter, and it's all about the storytelling, the folklore that we have around winter, and how we can use both witchcraft, nature worship, and literary influences and folkloric influences to survive winter, because it's this tough time, isn't it? Our death rates go up, our sad lamps have to come out because some of us find it a really difficult time. So I'm writing a book that's to explore how to survive winter using the witchcraft, the folklore, and those as the lens for it. And I'm particularly interested in Celtic traditions because the area, Dartmoor, is a Celtic area. And I'm finding out so many really interesting things about Celtic traditions that I never knew. So, for example, that Devon and Cornwall were both one tribe before. So we weren't sort of, disconnected by whether you put jam or cream first in those studies. It was all one tribe.
And that jam I think people forget, don't they, that England was tribes. We had we were made up of different tribes. Yeah,
absolutely. So the Celtic traditions that Devon and Cornwall come from, we've got the Dumnonian tribe, which went all the way up to Glastonbury, so bits of Somerset, and they were different types of Celtic, because the Celtic traditions are so diverse.
It's a confusing word, isn't it?
It's a very confusing word because it's another one of those umbrella terms. But I'm learning about the fact that the Celtic traditions where I am were the Brythonic Celtic traditions that ended up in Wales, in Cornwall, Devon, in France as well. And then you've got all the traditions in Scotland and Ireland being the other kind. So I'm exploring all of those things through the folklore and the traditions and the stories that we tell ourselves. And, for example, you could look at the stories about King Arthur, and think, how come he's in Somerset, Cornwall, Devon, Wales? You know, he goes to all these different places.
He was a busy lad.
He was a busy lad. He was a busy lad. But when you take into account we were the Brythonic Celtic traditions, it makes sense, because it's like, well, yeah, of course we're going to tell ourselves the same stories, because we're the same, you know, ultimately at the heart of it.
Yeah.
So it's been a really interesting journey, because it's kind of helping me to reconnect with my own roots here, but also making me think about what happened to all of our local gods. Where did they go? Where did they?
It is a passion of mine. The English deities. Yeah,
yes.
I'm on a mission to resurrect them all.
Me too.
Teamwork,
Me too.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where these are the conclusions I'm coming to, is that our gods are still there.
Oh yeah.
They've been absorbed by saint names, and they've been absorbed they're still there in river names and mountain names. And
absolutely.
It's just a case of reconnecting to them and remembering who they are.
Yeah. No, I think that's important, because when we hear that Celtic term, everyone assumes it covers everything in Britain, but it is generally the Welsh and the Irish, isn't it? And the poor English get kind of just swept under the carpet. Yeah, I am on a mission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the Isle of Man as well, the fact that the Isle of Man is a Celtic area, and there are similarities. So, for example, the stories about the black dog, if you take that as the black dog. So we've got the one of the most famous examples is obviously Conan Doyle's Hound of the Baskervilles.
One of my favourite authors.
Yeah, absolutely. Fabulous pre-pagan, very kind of switched on. But those stories also happen in the Isle of Man. They also happen in other areas as well. You've got black dogs in Ireland, in Scotland. And so those are the kind of things that I'm interested in, are these kind of the stories that link us and where they come from and where they lead us to.
Brilliant. Absolutely fascinating. Yeah, we should be a club or something to resurrect the English deities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they are there. They are there. They just got a bit squished and forgotten. And,
absolutely.
Trampled
Still
on.
Sleeping with one eye open.
Yes. Brilliant. It's been absolutely fascinating talking with you today. Thank you so much.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners and our watchers. And join us again next time on Pagan Portal Podcast.
You have been listening to the Pagan Portal Podcast, a Moonbooks Publishing production. For more information, please visit our website.